There is a fear that follows many people even when they are doing the best they can. A fear of never being enough, of always needing to prove something more, of never reaching a real point of inner rest. Billy Graham observed how constant self-pressure can turn into an internal weight, one that doesn't show in results but grows inside the mind. This is a reflection on that ongoing effort to try to be enough and the persistent feeling that, even so, something is always missing. Self-pressure rarely begins as something extreme. It settles in gradually, almost imperceptibly. A person learns to demand more from themselves to improve, to meet expectations, to avoid failure. At first, this feels like responsibility. Over time, it becomes constant pressure. The fear of never being enough doesn't arise because a person doesn't try. On the contrary, it appears precisely in those who are dedicated, committed, and trying to do their best. Each achievement becomes just a new starting point. Nothing feels final. There is always something to adjust, something to improve, something to prove. This conflict doesn't depend on external criticism. Even when no one is demanding anything, the mind keeps evaluating. The person reviews their own performance, questions decisions, compares results. There is no inner rest because the standard of demand is never fully met. Many people confuse self-pressure with motivation. They believe that pushing themselves is the only way to grow. But when that demand has no limits, it stops driving and starts wearing down. Effort ceases to be directed and becomes continuous, with no clear pauses. This fear also creates a difficult relationship with mistakes. Any failure, even a small one, takes on exaggerated weight. It isn't seen as part of the process, but as confirmation that one is still not enough. And in this cycle, mistakes stop teaching and start punishing. Constant self-pressure also interferes with how a person perceives themselves. Self-worth begins to depend on performance. Being enough stops being an inner state and becomes a goal that is always postponed. The person feels they will only be able to rest when they reach a level that never arrives. This conflict is reinforced by the habit of comparison. Observing what others do, achieve, or appear to achieve further activates the feeling of insufficiency. Even when the standards are unrealistic, the mind turns them into reference points. Many people live this way without realizing how much energy it consumes. They fulfill responsibilities, achieve results, keep moving forward. But internally, they carry a persistent sense of debt to themselves, as if they were always owing something they can never repay. This pattern also makes it difficult to recognize one's own effort. What has been done quickly loses value. Focus shifts to what is still missing. And so the present is never experienced as enough. It is only a temporary stage towards something that always seems distant. This is the central conflict. Living under constant internal demand, afraid of never being enough even when doing everything possible. A state that doesn't stop life but prevents inner rest. Billy Graham observed self-pressure with a careful eye, especially when it appeared disguised as virtue. For him, there was a clear difference between responsibility and constant demand. Responsibility organizes life. Limitless demand exhausts it. When a person begins to measure their worth only by what they produce, something inside starts to lose balance. He noticed that many people live trying to reach a sense of sufficiency that never arrives, not because they are failing, but because the internal standard of value is always shifting. As soon as one goal is reached, another takes its place. Rest is always postponed. The mind never finds a point of arrival. Billy Graham understood that this fear of never being enough does not come from a lack of effort, but from the absence of a clear internal limit. When a person doesn't know where to stop demanding from themselves, any result becomes insufficient. There is no space to recognize one's own path. There is only the pressure to keep going. In his view, this pattern creates deep exhaustion. A person lives guided by not yet done enough, not yet where they should be, not yet allowed to rest. And this constant state of waiting weakens the experience of being present. Billy Graham did not see this as moral weakness or a lack of discipline. He saw it as a sign that the inner life had been conditioned to results. Personal value begins to depend on performance, not on the awareness of who one is. When that happens, self-pressure stops being a tool and becomes an identity. He also observed that this fear is often solitary. Even surrounded by external recognition, the person feels that nothing is truly enough. Praise doesn't last. Achievements don't bring relief. Everything is quickly absorbed by the next internal demand. For Billy Graham, this state produces constant tension. A person moves, accomplishes, builds, but rarely feels at peace with themselves. There is always a sense that something needs to be fixed, improved, or proven. And that feeling doesn't depend on external circumstances. He saw that when the inner life is dominated by self-pressure, silence stops being rest and becomes a threat. Stopping means facing one's own sense of insufficiency. And because of that, many people keep their minds busy, always in motion. Billy Graham did not offer simple answers to this conflict. He simply pointed out that living while trying to be enough for an inner voice that is never satisfied is a path of continuous exhaustion, an effort that consumes energy without offering rest. This perspective builds trust because it does not condemn effort or diminish dedication. It simply recognizes that when internal demand has no limits, it stops strengthening and begins to erode. In modern life, self-pressure finds an ideal environment to expand. There are goals, metrics, constant comparisons, and the sense that there is always someone doing more, better, or faster. Even when a person fulfills their responsibilities, the reference is never their own limit, but an external standard that keeps changing. Daily life is organized around performance, producing, delivering, improving. The value of the day seems to depend on how much was done, and in this rhythm, rest starts to look like delay. Stopping brings guilt. Slowing down feels like a lack of ambition. The mind learns to associate personal worth with constant productivity. Billy Graham observed that this context causes self-pressure to stop being a choice and become a reflex. A person no longer decides to pressure themselves, they simply do. Even in moments of pause, the mind keeps evaluating what could be done better. Modern comparisons intensify this process, not only at work, but in every area of life. Appearance, success, stability, happiness. There is always an implicit model of sufficiency on display. And next to it, the person feels they are always one step behind. This pattern also affects how achievements are experienced. What should bring satisfaction turns into momentary relief. The feeling of having done enough doesn't last long. Soon, the next demand appears. The mind doesn't allow itself to remain in the present. At work, this self-pressure shows up as fear of making mistakes, of disappointing others, of not measuring up. Even when performance is good, the person feels they must constantly prove it. There is no clear point of inner safety. In relationships, the fear of not being enough also shows itself. Being a good professional, a good partner, a good child, a good friend. Expectations accumulate. The person tries to meet them all, often forgetting to notice how this affects them internally. Billy Graham saw that this way of living creates a deep kind of exhaustion, not only physical, but existential. The person feels as though they are always in debt to themselves. They never reach a point where they can simply be. This fear of never being enough becomes the background of modern life. It doesn't stop movement. On the contrary, it fuels it. But it demands a high price, the difficulty of experiencing inner peace, even when everything seems to be under control. It is in this context that self-pressure stops being motivation and becomes a permanent state. A state that pushes a person forward, but never allows them to feel complete at any moment. There are moments when movement stops and internal demand loses the support of routine. Tasks end, goals are put on hold, the day closes. It is in this interval that self-pressure usually takes on a clearer shape. When there is nothing left to accomplish, the mind keeps working. It reviews what was done, questions what could have been better, evaluates performance as if there were still something to prove. Silence does not bring immediate rest. It exposes the pressure that had been sustained throughout the day. Billy Graham observed that many people avoid this moment because it confronts the idea of sufficiency. Stopping means facing the feeling of never being enough, and in response, the mind prefers to stay busy even when there is no need. During late nights, this pressure intensifies. The body asks for rest, but the mind insists on reviewing. Small mistakes stand out, efforts are minimized. Internal demand does not decrease with fatigue, it simply becomes more repetitive. This silence does not accuse, it brings no new demands. It simply removes the distractions that kept pressure in the background. When everything stops, the fear of not being enough appears as a feeling, not as an organized thought. There is a restlessness that is hard to explain. The person doesn't know exactly what is missing, only that they feel they haven't yet arrived somewhere invisible. Even without clear goals, there is an implicit pressure to keep moving forward. Billy Graham saw this moment as a point of human revelation, not because it provides answers, but because it shows the cost of living under constant evaluation. When the mind finds no rest, even rest becomes a task. There is no need to interpret this silence. It doesn't ask for immediate solutions. It simply reveals the tension that has accumulated over time. A tension that doesn't come from real failures, but from the difficulty of accepting an internal limit. There is a suspension in this space, between what has been done and what will still be demanded, between effort and the feeling of never having done enough. It is there that many realize self-pressure does not fade when one stops. It only becomes more visible. This silence does not resolve the fear of insufficiency, but it makes it perceptible. And noticing is already different from simply carrying it. When self-pressure remains active for a long time, it begins to shape how a person perceives themselves, not as an occasional incentive, but as a constant filter. Everything that is lived passes through an internal evaluation. Was it enough? Was it good enough? Could it have been better? This process does not happen consciously. It becomes a mental habit. Billy Graham observed that this kind of continuous demand creates a silent yet profound exhaustion. A person does not feel authorized to rest, not even when they have fulfilled everything that was expected. There is always a sense that something remains unfinished. And this unfinished feeling has no clear form. It is simply a weight that follows along. Over time, the fear of never being enough interferes with the relationship a person has with their own effort. What has been done quickly loses value. Focus shifts to what is still missing. The mind does not recognize the path already traveled. It only points to the next step. And in this way, the present becomes merely a means, never a place to remain. This pattern also affects how a person deals with failure. Any mistake, even a small one, takes on exaggerated proportions. It is not seen as part of the process, but as confirmation of insufficiency. Internal demand intensifies precisely at the moments when care and understanding would be most needed. Billy Graham saw that, in this state, inner life becomes a hostile space. Instead of serving as support, awareness begins to function as constant pressure. The person lives in a continuous internal dialogue, trying to correct themselves, adjust themselves, prove themselves. This prolonged self-pressure also generates ongoing emotional tension. The mind rarely finds rest. Even in calm moments, there is an underlying restlessness, as if something still needed to be done before the person could finally feel at peace. Over time, this affects the ability to feel genuine satisfaction. Achievements are not celebrated. Praise does not last. External recognition finds no internal space to settle. Everything is quickly absorbed by the next demand. Billy Graham understood that this exhaustion did not come from a lack of ability, but from the absence of clear internal limits. When there is no point at which self-demand ends, a person begins to live in a permanent state of effort, an effort that does not lead to rest. Ignoring this pattern does not dissolve it, it simply becomes normalized. The person starts to believe that living under constant pressure is natural, that the fear of never being enough is part of adulthood, responsibility, growth, and so internal demand stops being questioned. This deeper reflection does not offer ready-made answers. It simply reveals the cost of living while trying to reach an internal standard that never stabilizes, a cost that does not appear externally, but weighs heavily on the experience of being with oneself. Perhaps the fear of never being enough did not begin recently. It may have formed gradually through the habit of self-criticism, comparison, and postponing rest while waiting for a moment when everything finally feels acceptable. That moment, often, never arrives. Billy Graham never treated this internal demand as a sign of virtue. For him, living while trying to reach a sufficiency that never stabilizes is a deep form of exhaustion. Not because the person does not try hard enough, but because the demand has no stopping point. It is possible that this video has not brought a clear answer on how to free yourself from this fear. And that is intentional, because self-pressure does not disappear with a quick decision. It is sustained by long-standing mental habits, repeated, almost invisible. Becoming aware of them already changes how this weight is carried. Perhaps you still don't know what to do with this internal demand, and perhaps you don't need to decide right now. Some reflections do not ask for immediate solutions. They simply ask that what once operated in the background be seen with greater honesty. I suggest that you subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you continue following reflections that move at this same pace. Human themes observed with depth, based on the ideas of Billy Graham, without quick promises and without ready-made formulas. If you'd like, leave a comment. It can be something simple. One word. A short sentence about when you notice that self-pressure starts to weigh more than it helps. There's no need to explain too much. Perhaps the most important thing is not to prove that you are enough, but to notice how much effort has been spent trying to convince that inner voice. Some things do not change when they are confronted by force. They change when they stop being ignored.